one thing I will call out is like, thinking about specifically for like acapella beatboxing, because I've done a lot of both like solo and acapella. Just like when you find videos on YouTube, just kind of like keep in mind like whether it's meant for like a group or for solo. And we'll kind of talk a little bit more about, group dynamics later. But one thing I really want to call out is with acapella beatboxing, and if you're listening to other videos, if you're listening to other songs, like CJ said, um, really just like focus mainly on like the rhythm and like the kind of like core of the song, because if you are beatboxing for an acapella team, you're basically like the anchor for the group, and basically just maintaining the rhythm is the most important part. So if nothing else, prioritize that when you're listening to other people.
That's a great point. And to add on to that, my a lot of my learning how to beatbox was not as a solo artist. I learned from the disciplines of music and being that accompaniment because I started as a bass and our job is very similar to the beatboxers. I'll talk about this later, but we're holding down the fort. You know what I mean? Like we are going to be the basis, the foundation for the music to keep running at a specific time signature, feel, whatever it may be. So looking for these aspects when you listen to the music is really critical. So you're gonna in the production you're not just gonna be listening for the sounds that sound the coolest or the things that are gonna pop out because that's not always going to be your job. Listen to different music styles, listen to how these different sounds all accomplish the same thing, which is maintaining rhythm and giving you different tempo patterns and variations of the music. Listen to how those are achieved through the sounds so that way you can add those sounds to your toolkit. And then should you be given a 4/4 song, should you be given a 3/6 song, whatever the cadence is of the piece that you need to be working with, especially in a group setting, you'll have some in your arsenal that you know you can work with for whatever that it may be. Let's see, what else do we have? Um,
One of the things I like here on the what to listen for with the tempo patterns, practicing with the metronome, I'm just going to say it because I want everyone to hear it. One of my favorite apps is called Tempo. I had to pay for it. I think it was maybe like $2, $3 on the App Store, but it is so worth it. You can change the sound of the metronome. You can you can change beats. So you can actually have just the downbeat playing or just one and three, or you can take them all out or put them all in. So it's a great way to test yourself and like go along with the metronome for a few measures and then cut that off, but let the visual keep going. So then you're not hearing it, and then bring it back in and see if you're still on tempo. So that's one thing that I like to listen for.
yeah, and as a musician, like you're gonna have rehearsals, you're going to have like breath exercises and things that you do while other people can warm up and do scales. As a beatboxer you have to be in rhythm. I don't know if you guys have ever tried to sing a song without the backtrack playing or anything like that, but tempo is hard to keep if you're not trained and train yourself to do that. It's very easy to speed up when things are exciting, it's very easy to slow down too much when things are slower, and learning how to keep in line is going to keep everybody else in line. Because remember, everybody on stage is doing whatever their job is, but are your job is to make sure that everybody's in time. So if you slow down, if you speed up, everybody's going to feel that. The audience is, and so is your team. So really making sure that you're familiar with the tempo patterns and practicing with that metronome so you know what it's like to feel in time. And you can catch yourself when you start getting, worked up and in the middle of a performance. Like learning how to do that takes a lot of stamina, producing pitches and hits and all these kinds of things for minutes at a time. It takes stamina. So make sure you practice.
Like that you
Metronome is so
mentioned
full.
warming up as well, because I know a lot of beatboxers that don't warm up their beatboxing while the group was warming up. So for me, when the group is doing warm ups, I would be doing tempo work. I would be doing different sounds. I would be trying different rhythms. My warm ups were for me to warm up my kit to figure out where I was on that day. So speaking of sounds and different kinds of sounds to warm up, I would love to jump to sound banks and just start talking through. I think this was CJ's list of sounds and how he breaks it down.
Yeah, so this was integral to my introduction to beatboxing personally. Like I said, I had a mentor, so I was lucky in that he was able to show me a couple of things of how he went about it, and I used this methodology when I first started out. I couldn't make all these sounds at the beginning, but we basically worked as a tag team between my bass and some of the things that I could do, and his vocal percussion and what he could also do. And we just made a list. We just did an inventory of what we were capable of producing, so that when we needed to write a VP line, we had it on tap, so we knew how much we knew, and what we had to work with. It's really, I think it's really cool because you can also visualize your progression and see how much you've grown as a VP artist. And I think it's really, really cool to, and you can give yourself some cool names too and personalize it. I really think it's important, but also we index them based on how, like, which components of our mouth we were using. So this is a good version of communication. Like, this is somebody orally teaching me how he's making this sound by saying, hey, this really involves my lips. So really focus on the lips when you're making this sound. Or the throat is responsible for making the pitch in these, or I'm using my teeth to make this sound a certain way, right? I think it's really, really important.
Yeah. I think that's super cool to like hear how you learned and like approached it. One thing I do want to call out here, just because I know, I remember what it was like when like I first started beatboxing and like you see people doing all these cool sounds and like really cool things. So one thing I want to emphasize is like, yes, definitely having more variety of sounds will like help and it'll like help you do like cool stuff. But at the same time, it's not necessary to be able to do like all of these sounds in order to like be a very effective and like honestly really really strong or outstanding like acapella beatboxer. Like you can honestly get by with just like BTK, like the like you can do just those three sounds in lots of different ways to come up with like really really effective beats. So if you are feeling really overwhelmed by seeing this list and being like, oh my god, how am I ever going to learn all of these, you don't have to if you don't want to. Like really it all comes back to like rhythm and holding tempo. That's like the core, the key that we were talking about. And if you only have like three or four sounds to do that, then great. Use those sounds like to the best of your ability.
Yeah, I really like a lot of what you just said, Misha. That was awesome. Such a great point. If most of this never even saw the light of day on the stage for acapella, just to be clear, this is entirely, I mean, more as a solo artist this would be more useful, to be honest, but you just need um the basic components of a drum. Think of it like a drum. That's how I saw it. Like if I have my hi-hat, if I got my snare, if I have my bass, my kick drum, I'm good. You got the boots and cats, and you are good. You can run with that. You just need to learn how to vary those sounds. So if you the way I approached it, especially at the beginning, was making sure that those three things were as great as they possibly could be. I made those sounds crisp so that when they were hitting, they were very impactful because that was what you're going to be hearing for most of the time. So if you have a really strong brush drum, teeth whistle, and a synth sound, like that's awesome. But if that's not what majority of the piece is going to be heard on, you're not going to be scored on that as much, and the audience is going to get to hear that as much because there's just not as much opportunity unless you have a solo section in your arrangement to show off your toolkit. So making sure the things that you're going to be using the most often are as sharp as can be is really critical. That's where I would put most of my time to, especially in the beginning. I didn't move on to any of the higher stuff until I made sure my boots and cats was flawless in my opinion, right?
This might be a little selfish, but I would love if you could go through these sounds so we could hear them. Just quickly demonstrate like what does each thing sound like, and then for posterity, if anyone's going back to this video and listening, they can say, "Oh, that voiced lip hi hit sounds sick." I don't know what that means. I just want to hear it.
Yeah. So a lot of, like I said, a lot of this, my mentor was a VP. Like I was a bass, he was a VP teaching me how to do VP's things. So a lot of this list is actually his sounds. Like many of the teeth and lip things are his things. The things that I was able to do were mainly in the throat section. So like learning how to do a throat bass versus um, like an inward throat bass, for example. Let me see. So that's like the throat bass, right? But then the more inward one would be. So you add this level of it's basically your vocal cords are scratching together. But if you do it properly, then it doesn't like damage your vocal cords. You know how to direct that sound. So a lot of what I learned in the beginning was how to incorporate my resonance that I practiced from being a bass and using those pitches in the sounds so that we had a more full sound when we were doing things. Oh, I love a good K snare. I'm a sucker for a K snare, guys.
I know we have even more sounds on this list.
Mm.
Do either of y'all have favorite sounds that you just, when you get to do it, you're like, yes, this can fit in a line.
I mean,
Honestly, for me, it's just like my K snare. I get a lot of compliments on it because it's very like crisp. Like
yeah.
it just has like a very, I don't
Hmm.
know, I like the way, because I do mine outward instead of inward. A lot of people do it like inward, and I'll go. So I just honestly, like I'm saying, like I'm like very big on just like the basics. Like sure I can do like I've learned other like fancy sounds and whatnot, but like I just really like my case there.
I'm in the same boat. I really didn't incorporate a lot of the fancy stuff that he knew how to do. I learned it to practice discipline and just learning a sound over the course of months or years. But honestly, like my inward K, love that thing. Anytime you get to use it, it's just so satisfying when you work on something and then you. I'm sure we can all relate when if you working on a sound for however long and then it finally happens and you're like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, and it's just that, and you just want that over and over again, and that's the satisfaction of working on something. So it's like it pops, you know.
It took me 5 years to learn a BMG snare. I'm not even kidding, but that the first day I got it as like a second semester senior, greatest day of my VP life. Um, I think it's an interesting
You
point
have to
y'all
do
made.
it. You have to do it now. You
I
can't
don't even
just
know
say
if I
that.
can still, but it used to be a little bit more less farty. But yeah,
That's
it's
still
supposed.
that's tight. I like that.
I think you guys made an interesting point where it's like when we're crafting our VP style, it's not really about the sounds. It's about how you're utilizing it and it's how you're applying it. And so that's kind of
Good.
where I talk about technique. So unless y'all have something to add, I can jump into some technique stuff that I've learned over the years.
Oh,
Yeah.
later we'll do the application stuff because that's where the meat of it honestly is. Like the
Yeah,
sound bank
yeah.
and all that, that's to each person. But
That's
I
just
think
for
the technique
funsies.
is how you like show who you are as an artist.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
So I'll just talk quickly through a few things here. The first thing is that beatboxing is just muscles in your face. Okay, so it's hard to do at first. Don't give up, and it's just a new muscle. That's how I kept the 5 years of motivation for that stupid BMG snare because I was like, this muscle, I just need to work this one out, and eventually I'll get it with practice. And eventually I did. You got your kick drum. I'm not going to spend too much time here because I feel like most of us have a general idea of what these sound like. But the basic idea that I try to emphasize is the building up of the pressure behind your lips for the B and then releasing and then making it punchier. For me, I would make it punchier by adding an F after the B or a V. So, for example, instead of just going, I might go, or now there's a specific difference in how my lips are approaching both of those. In the first one, I'm just going, there's a very circular form to how the release is. But for how I really started using my kicks was as if I was going to say BV, but then not make the V sound. So it would be more. So there's a difference between. For me, that felt punchier. It felt more natural. I had my hi-hats, which is like just the TS in Boots and Cats, just literally TS. And to make it more real, I tried to keep a very thin space between my lips. So it. So difference between smiling and and then finally your snare. We love a good K snare. That breath out after K is so important. And I know I struggled a lot with getting a dry throat when I started with the K sound because it would always catch in the back of my throat and it would just be like a. But the real emphasis for the K snare is that breath, that part is the most audible part of the K sound. And also the snare is the most important part of your kit. Whenever we did shows that were off mic, your snare is the thing that is going to be heard. And so that is the one that is really important for emphasizing your breath and is the best way to kind of self-check on how much breath you have in. If you're hitting your snares and you're feeling like they're weak, you should probably take a good deep breath in the next phrase. This is really how I learned beatboxing was through notation. This notation was taught to me by Bijal, my predecessor, and he used dots to represent each of the beats. And he would sometimes put dashes in between to show the eighth notes. And then when I started writing more complicated stuff, I wanted 16th notes, so I added in those vertical stripes, and those are just the subdivisions. So simple enough. For me, this is a great visual, and I'll talk about why I use this a lot in a little bit. And that little bit is right now. This is the value. Your reference guide and notation, your guiding any substitute VPs. There was a day when there was a couple of occasions. I think I missed maybe 2 gigs in my 5 years, and in those 2 gigs, I would just hand my notebook to my fellow bass, and he would use it as a guide just to know what the general structure for each section is. It's also great because you can then visualize the time and space in your song. You can see where you've clumped up too many sounds or where you could use some more stuff. And just the practice of writing lets your brain form those neuron connections. It lets you really free up your mind, and you can start thinking more about the feeling of the song. You can think more about the group, and it makes it easier when you have the rest of the beat in your muscle memory. Imagine, get it right once, get it right consistently, get it to muscle memory. Not to bring up the BMG snare again, but I was imagining for 5 years. So like, it may take that time, but as long as you know what you're going for, then you can get to that muscle memory. This is my list of sounds going down with my kicks. I've got that's like a heartbeat. This BT is like a tabla sound. Again, I did not do fusion acapella, so this is the most fake tabla I've ever done, but I would just try to pitch something up with my voice afterwards. And then that little squiggly line is me trying to do throat bass. I regularly told my group I can do throat bass once a day, and I can't do it anytime more. So that's why I could do it either in rehearsal or sound check or in a performance. So I could never actually add it to a line. Let's see if I can get it right now. And you will not see that for the rest of the day. K snares, your K family. I have 3 different families: K, click, P sounds. K is k, then ksh, then KOH. Inward breath, again with this, and then KN is kind of like a knock. Click sounds. Nimish have demonstrated this, but it's with the tongue at the sides of your teeth. I think it was once described to me as Daffy Duck trying to make just a squealing sound, and they go like, and then you try to get that click, and then isolating that where it's hitting the side. So again, there's like a little bit of contact with your tongue at the sides of your teeth, and that allows this snappiness to it. The one below that, KLA, that A represents me breathing out. I used that if I wanted a more reverby sound, like a, and then you have your inward breath. I would do inwards with a little asterisk. P family of snares goes, it's like a spectrum from PF to PSH. PF is the harder one, so let's go to PSH first. It's literally just PF is like trying to say piff, P-I-F-F, but then taking out the I, piff. The more plosive part of it, the explosive, that takes the muscle practice. So that took me a while to get very explosive, but as long as you're starting off with something like a, that's the right start. I call it a spectrum because I go from PF to PSH and kind of slide in between. And my favorite part is in the middle with PFSH because that sounds the most real to me. That would sound like a, so from PSH to PF, that spectrum might sound like, so sliding from one side to the other. PFR is I'm trilling an R after my F. So if you control your R's and go, you just add that explosive in front of it and you get a nice little drum roll. So PS is the last one. I kind of use it as a symbol as well. It's just a hi-hats. You got your simple open hi-hat. The asterisk one is not something I would usually notate, but it's something that I knew if I had a very specific section, I would write that in as a visual breath mark. Hi-hats were where I cheated and I got my breaths a lot. So if I'm doing a fast pattern, then I'm usually sneaking in one, usually not notated, it's just as needed. And then finally, this is supposed to be a T with a little dot above it, like a staccato note. So just to show that I'm going, instead of. And then finally, my miscellaneous sounds, which includes my favorite sound of all time, a CH. I say that because it's so versatile. I can use it as a kick, a snare, or a hi-hat. For example, if it was a hi-hat, it might go. If it was a snare, I might go. Or if I'm going as a kick. So super useful. It's a really easy, just CH. SH is a nice sort of reverby, whooshy, I just call them whooshes. And then VR, I would do that sometimes in fills if I'm trying to go into a nice kick drum. And then finally PS for your cymbals. Some of the advanced sounds like the hiccups, I don't really know how to describe this other than you're taking a breath of air and it's trying to catch in the back of your throat. It's almost like a little ball of air trying to get caught and you get a hit, hit, hit. Sometimes I would put that with a K in front of it and I would get a kick, kick, kick. And it would be fun. That's probably my favorite sound. If I thought of a song where I got to do a hiccup, I'd be like, yeah. BMG snares, tried that. Just watch Swish Beatbox, like he can do better. Throat bass, Audie did that. We know how that's gonna go. Shakers, I do it kind of like I'm breathing in and out. And this took a while because it's not circular breathing, but you have to manage your breath going in and out in this period of time. And so I do it as if I'm making a hi-hat, but then I'm breathing through my teeth. It takes a little bit of practice because it's different than going. You're actually breathing. And so that was really fun once you get it and once your diaphragm can support that. Pitched ambience is along with the whooshes. Towards the end of my Nor'easter stint, I tried to use whooshes in the same key as the song. So I would imagine that I'm whistling and then I would use the whoosh in the key, like on the root. So if the song was in F sharp, I would end the song with a whoosh and it just went from being to, and it would just nicely fit in with the ambiance. Click rolls, trumpets, vocal scratches, those were things I didn't really do that much, so I will move past that for now. Time signatures, this is how I would notate it.
Wait, do you mind if I just point something out
absolutely.
on the sounds, if you mind going to the past slide? Just some things that I think might be helpful to point out. So one is just like a demonstration of like we were saying earlier, people making the same sound in different ways, right? So he's talking about his like whooshes and the way he does his. I do mine slightly differently. So I use like my bottom lip and like my teeth. So instead of his like, or whatever, which I obviously can't do because that's not how I do it, I go like, so it's like the same sound, you just do it a different way. So that's one thing I want to point out. And another one is, like I was saying earlier, you can use all these sounds. It's great if you don't need to, you don't have to. But some sounds that I think would be worth sort of incorporating into your kit would be inward sounds, just because if you're running out of breath, it's really helpful to be able to use these sounds to breathe in because it makes your beats sound more complex without you having to like stop in the middle or just kind of like gasp for air like very audibly. So an inward K is something that a lot of people use. I really like the zipper. Or I also do this thing where I just kind of like breathe in, but like if you breathe in very sharply, it kind of just sounds like aesthetic. So like, just probably worth incorporating a couple like breathing sounds.
Totally. 4/4, 4 dots in the measure. 3/4, 3 dots in the measure. 6/8, I would put a dot on beat 1 and beat 4 and then do dashes for 2, 3, 5, 6. And then complex time, I mean, you just put as many dots as you got in the measure. So occasionally they would throw in a 5/4 bar and it would mess me up, but just having the visual there was really helpful to know that, I got to hit one more snare in this measure, otherwise I'm going to be off by a beat. So it helped me visualize a lot. Breath exercises. Finding your diaphragm is the prerequisite. If you haven't isolated and like felt your diaphragm before, then lie on your back and put a stack of textbooks on your stomach and start breathing and watch where the textbooks are rising. That's where your diaphragm is. Um, the first exercise I practiced with was just clasping my hands, sticking them forward, making sure I'm sitting up straight, and then I would just do the beatboxing line. It causes your diaphragm to work harder because you're extending the muscles on the sides and as well in the front. So you're extending yourself further than you would actually push yourself on stage. So you get better stamina. The second exercise that I used to do with the group is to breathe in for 4 beats, holding it for 4 beats, and then breathing out on an SS, a really high pitched S. The reason is that high pitched S, I can't explain the vocal mechanics behind it, but it causes your diaphragm to work harder than going on an SH. So we would go for 4 beats, 8 beats, 12, 16, up, all the way up. And the idea is at the end of the breath out, you are completely out of breath. So when you breathe in for 4, hold for 4, and breathe out for 4, at the end of that out for 4, no breath left. You shouldn't be able to talk. You should be gasping for breath. Same with 16 beats. Now, the hard part about that is being consistent. You don't want to use up too much breath in the first half of that or in the second half of that. You want it to be a nice, even, consistent breath out. So that gives you really good vocal control and breath control. The last one was breathing in for 8, holding for 8, and then just breathing out for as long as possible. That would become a competition between us in rehearsal.
Hey, Rudy, you mind if I hop on this train real quick and,
Mm-hmm.
and I want to provide a little bit more context for how important breath exercises are here because as a performer, you really gotta you want to practice exactly how you want to perform, but you want to practice even harder than you're going to perform because especially when it comes to breath exercises, I don't um I'm not going to sit here and tell you that you like breath exercises is the only reason that you will or won't produce the sound that you're supposed to. But I will tell you that when you get on stage, it's like think of it, you went up like three I don't know, atmospheres and altitude. Like you can't breathe because either your nerves are going to be contributing to that, or there's also going to be choreography in some of your performances, right? Especially if you're in an a cappella setting. So understanding that breath control is needs to be on lockdown for what it is that you are going to be providing as a VP is important because it's not just going to be you standing in a circle like performing with your group. If your group happens to have you participating in the choreography, which I know some groups don't, sometimes the VP's off to the side, but if you're up there nervous and you're breaking a sweat, it's really important that you have the discipline to really incorporate what Namisha said earlier about having sounds in which you can just breathe and continue to cycle your breathing while you're performing so that it's autonomic. You don't have to think about it at all, and you can just slay that performance. You know what I mean? That's basically the biggest takeaway that I can say for breath exercise. Because once you do that, even when it's harder to breathe, you will have the foundation that you need to continue in those situations.
Yeah, it's about knowing how much breath you have and how much you can use. If you really want to have fun, do some sprints and then run your set. As far as creating a VP line, this is the goal. It's to elevate the singers, elevate their performance, and to keep the audience's focus on them and maintaining the grasp on the feel and the emotion that this group is conveying, as well as the emotion that the audience is picking up. And I separate those two because not every story that you're going to tell is going to be perfectly understood by the audience, but you want to be able to convey with your group the feelings that you want the audience to pick up. It's going to be really awkward if you're trying to sing a sad song and the audience thinks it's happy, or vice versa. Like, if you've ever seen a group that's singing a happy song but they look sad or scared, it doesn't make sense to the feeling of the song. So your goal as the VP is to lend a sense of the emotion to the group so that they can also carry the emotion that the audience hears in the melody. Some common rhythms that I work with, I would lie if I told you I started with anything else. Whenever I approached a beatboxing line, it was always with these 5, and I would do some variation on it. Boots and Cats is just the rock beat, or how I like to call it, a milli by Lil Wayne. And then, he just goes off. Anyway, I'm just thinking of Lil Wayne now. 3-3-2 is splitting up the emphasis with 3/8 notes, 3/8 notes, 2/8 notes. So if I'm going 1, 2, 3, 4. If you do that in double time and you take out the hi-hats, you might end up with something like 4 on the floor. Actually, before I go to 4 on the floor, 3-3-2 is what I would go to when I was stuck. If I didn't know what to do in a certain part, I would try out a 3-3-2, and sometimes it fit, sometimes it needed a little adjusting, sometimes it was super off. But it most of the time was able to give me a sense of what type of feel did that section need. Did it work with a more offbeat type of thing, or did it need something that was a little more on the beat? 4 on the floor, just give your kicks to the floor. And halftime, the classic. Whatever, right? So these common rhythms, you can go and make them super complicated, but at the very core, I always started with this, especially considering I was doing Western beats. Now, if you consider a lot of Desi beats, that's one that we never did. But in my Kerala culture, that was huge. And that's like what I listen to if I'm listening to Malayali music, is stuff with that. So if there's other common rhythms to whatever genre or fusion you're trying to do, then that's a place to add, that's a place to start with what you're writing. I had a pattern bank. I wrote down patterns from songs that I really liked. This was my very first pattern bank that I put together. On this, I had 3-3-2, I had some fills. I notated drumming song, which was a thing that the Nor'easters did. Shake It Off by Taylor Swift is there. Umbrella by Rihanna is there. Just a bunch of things that if I heard it, I wrote it down. And notice I didn't put any of the dots in the top ones because those are simpler, but once I got to the bottom, again, because this was just my shorthand, I would write the dots, little small dots above, kind of in the bottom third. You can kind of see those. But yeah, I try to commit to getting those to muscle memory. So if at any point in a rehearsal I'm stuck, I have a list to go to. And if I don't have it in muscle memory, then I can just pull out my notebook and I can see that right there. This is one thing that really helped me. When I was thinking about making my varied sounds, I did not go for a lot of different sounds. I went for being versatile with what I had. And so this pitch versus volume chart was what I used. I got to vary the pitch and the volume of the sounds, and you can see the graph kind of showing as you're going up and down. That's your volume going up and down. As you're going left to right, that's pitch going up and down. So the thing I always say is to start off by knowing where your center is, where 0, 0, where the origin is, because that is your foundation. That is where your muscle memory sound is. And then from there, you can start adding in more breath to make it louder, taking away breath to make it quieter. If you want to make a higher pitch, you can make your lips into a nice E and go. And if you want a low pitch, you make a nice ooh. And you get this variation of. And so that is how I would get a bunch of different K snares. Even though it's the same sound, it's different because I've given this change in pitch. Volume is super important because you don't want to be forte when everyone else is piano. So just know that you gotta self-manage some of that dynamic level. And especially as I got later through my Nor'easter time, I found that I had more fun and the audience found it more impressive when I could put a crazy amount of volume behind a sound and just behind a section and be consistent at that, and then suddenly bring it back. And you get this feeling of, all right, when I'm sound checking, I'm gonna make sure I'm in the middle, but I'm also gonna show the sound engineer what's my loudest so they know that this is coming, and also what's my quietest. So what do they need to make sure is audible? But the feeling of being able to just literally blow people back and be like, oh my God, where did that kick drum come from? That's a great feeling. It all comes down to the amount of breath that you're using. So again, going back to breath support, but pitch versus volume is, yeah, the crux of how I made variations on my sounds. Speaking of variations, this is the idea that I would always follow. Songs have themes, lyrically and musically, and sticking with something familiar gives yourself a foundation, gives the audience something to latch onto. And so you want to have a consistent rhythm. I'd say, 2 to 3 different rhythms in each song. So if we think back to those common Western rhythms, 2 or 3 different ones in a song, not much more than that, because unless the song is a real journey and it's completely different by the end, I still want to give the audience something that they can connect with. The variations come from the pitch versus volume. It comes from how much space am I using on my breath as I'm breathing out. And so that allows me to re-engage the group every 8 bars, whatever, every phrase, and the audience. They get something new that they're hearing. So it subtly refreshes things. It builds to moments. It's used to transition in and out of sections. And you can use it to highlight different textures in the voices. The nice thing about this is the psychoacoustic effect. Now, the psychoacoustic effect is the idea that you can do a different sound to what you have been doing if you set it up, because the audience will perceive the original sound as still occurring. So if I was doing Boots and Cats for 4 bars and then I threw in a crash cymbal on the 5th bar, they're going to imagine that that kick drum was still there. So for example, it's not taking away because it's still the same rhythm, but the psychoacoustic effect allows me to add another sound while giving me the leeway to know that the audience still finds it familiar. Just to kind of summarize, creating by hand versus creating by ear, I really benefited from reading and studying the sheet music and writing along with it, but I couldn't have done any of that if I wasn't listening and really studying rehearsal recordings and writing down Shake It Off by Taylor Swift. So there's an overlap of creating by hand and creating by ear that I really benefited from, and I used both of those to try and grow through the different sounds that I was learning. So yeah, always reflecting on run-throughs, rehearsals, warm-ups, that's a huge thing, and especially your gigs. But even the bad takes, there's something to learn from. So anything to add?
Yeah. Yeah, I do just want to add here. I think this is like a great walkthrough of kind of like how to approach it, like in a very like disciplined and technical way. Props to you. For anybody who's lazy like me, I was just like recording. It was like all voice memos and like listening it back. I don't think I've ever written down any beatboxing ever. And so it's still possible. Like you can totally do it both ways, and there's like advantages and disadvantages to both. But yeah, I think recordings was the main way for me, and something that I really liked doing was rehearsal recordings, like, you know, not only recording myself, like beatboxing with the group during rehearsal, but also like when it was a new song and was trying to figure out like what beat I wanted to do. I would record a run through once everybody like knew their parts and knew how to sing the song. I would record one with no beat and just like a metronome or something. And then I could use that recording to basically go home and like try out different beats over it so that by the next time we were at practice, then like I had something that I could actually kind of pilot and see if it worked.
Yeah, I really like that. Ironically, I did the same thing, but just recording the rehearsal and then going into a music room or even just in my dorm, wherever I was at the time, wherever I needed to be, and just like having that recording to work with it. That was almost like a requirement kind of that I made for with my music director. I was like, hey, so like I just need a recording. Like if you give me a recording, I will sit there and I will figure out what works. And then I go to rehearsal and then I try out a couple of things that I might have thought out and say, this doesn't work, this doesn't work. But having something to work with that you can like that you can listen to and then also hear the sound together is really really important. I really like that approach. Very easy to
Mhm.
do.
Yeah, I would use my recordings and I would take it to my notebook and I would write down where was I rushing, where was I dragging. So this is one song that we did. This is simple by my standards for what I would write down, because if you look down at the bottom of the first page, I just kind of stacked and I didn't rewrite the dots dashes every single time. I said rehearsal mark E is the same as A, rehearsal mark G is the same as D, H is the same as, G is the same as C, H is the same as D, whatever. But once we got to competition sets, this was the first song in our ICCA set. And as we changed the arrangement, as I changed the vocal percussion, I was crossing out sections in the middle. I was writing notes to myself about what I thought was cool and what I absolutely thought was, I'm not even going to say it. In the very middle of the page, there's a triangle, and I put a little triangle with an arrow to show if I'm rushing there or dragging there. So I would know, like, okay, in rehearsal mark F, in the second bar of rehearsal mark F, when I bring in my 4 on the floor, I started to rush there. So I need to be really intentional when I'm in rehearsal, when I'm practicing, to bring it back. The second song is a song that had no vocal percussion except for a singular whoosh at the very end. And I still had a whole page dedicated to it because I still wanted to visualize the space. Same with the third and fourth songs. Great thing about the notebook is, you know, I could give my notebook to Bijal, my mentor, and he could write notes. See the bottom of the second page, and he would write notes about what I should do, and it was really helpful. It's nice to go back and think like, okay, so there's an opportunity there to do something. Um, and just to add ideas. It was also great once we got to recording because I could take what I had originally done in the competition set and just scale it up. On the left side, we did new rules, and so I just kind of sketched out the different ideas. On the right side, we did breathe in. I had about 6 hours to put the line together before recording it, and I would not have been able to do it without this notebook because I started off by sketching out the important ideas at the very top of the page. And then after that, I started just listening by ear. I think a lot of this 6 hour process, I was listening to the arrangement over and over and over, finally coming up with something and then jotting it down, erasing it if it didn't work. And again, because it was just a 6 hour time period, I just said at the very bottom, build 9,000. Didn't emphasize, didn't add any context. But just this being my shorthand allowed me to go into the studio and just read from the notebook and know what I needed to give based off of that. I didn't have to create anything on the spot.
Sweet. That was awesome. Uh, I I didn't do any of the notation initially because, like I said, I came from a background of just singing, just straight singing, like a lot of us do. Um, and because of that, I used a lot of what I learned about the way that the music felt good when the bass and beatboxing were kind of working together. Like there's something to be said about, having a real nice rhythm and then also having a bass line that's like, okay, okay. Like the way that those two intermingle in production is gonna apply the same when you go into a cappella setting. So I really want to talk about how much our roles are exactly the same. I didn't feel like my role changed at all. I was given a mic when I had a bass, when I was a bass, and I was given a mic when I became VP. And in both cases, I was orchestrating either rhythm or tempo, and I was also trying to make sure that the whole groove of the song was working together. And I also want to talk about how mic positioning is super important for being a bassist or a beatboxer. We'll talk about mic like technique and things like that as we move forward. But that was something that I learned as a bass before I even got to VPs. Like being able to capture more of the lower resonant sounds applies just as much to VP as it does to being a bass. So you want to make sure that the mic is closer up to your nasal cavity, and then you allow more of the resonance to happen in that chamber. So that this is pretty much my approach as I initially came into it.
Yeah, I actually want to add on to that. So even for me, I mean, I wasn't a bass, obviously, my voice doesn't go that low, but I did, like, kind of going back to, what is the core of this? It's like keeping the rhythm and knowing the rhythm. And like CJ said, a lot of the times the bass is kind of like keeping the rhythm for the piece. So if I was ever not sure what rhythm was working, because something you might come up against, maybe you guys have like experienced this already, is like, okay, you guys are doing a cover, an acapella cover of some song. You might go listen to the original and be like, great, this is the beat for the original song. I'm going to do it for our arrangement. It doesn't work because a lot of the times the song isn't arranged like exactly in the same rhythm patterns that the original song is. And so if that happens and you're kind of stuck and not sure what to do, you can look at the bass and sort of follow the bass rhythm. So like even like, okay, very simple example just to kind of like demo it. So like a common like bass rhythm might be like dum 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 dum. Now the beat. Then you can put fills. Right, so you can kind of just like go with that if you're stuck and not sure what to do. Just follow the bass.
Absolutely. That's essentially what I was about to get into. Like, that was such a good transition. I love that. So I want to talk about working with the music director. I did this pretty intimately because I I didn't sign up and say, hey, like, yeah, I definitely know what I'm doing. Totally a VP. Yeah, I could totally do it. Don't even worry about it. No, I was definitely asking my music director, like, hey, so what do you have in mind for the piece right here? Because when he wrote the bass line, he had an idea of the rhythm. Right, because the baseline establishes rhythm. Like there are some a cappella groups that don't even have a VP because the baseline can essentially do that for that piece, depending on how you want to run it. So because of that, there is already rhythm there. You just have to be able to work with it and within those boundaries and accent it and elevate it in some cases. Sometimes it'll be absent and you'll just have the bass line going dum dum, like doing something like that, and you got to be like, all right, guys, let's lay down a beat or something. So let's talk about some of the things that I either worked with my music director on, or I looked at how he wrote the music in order to get an idea of what I'm gonna put in inside of my lines, right? So tempo. Look for changes in tempo in the piece if you ever have them. Sometimes some directors don't put changes in tempo for acapella. It's a lot easier to record if you have the same tempo going. But when you put an acapella set together, sometimes there are transitions and there are times where within a song you speed up. So because of that, that means the rhythm may not necessarily adapt well to the tempo change if you just like slow down, like it doesn't mean it sounds good still. Like if we're doing the merengue in one section and then we start throwing in some Lil Wayne, I don't really think those are going to work together. So and there were times where we have different cultural influences for music coming together, so understanding how they can blend and how to make those seamless transitions is really important. Also, dynamics. You're doing live music, not in a production setting, so dynamics is huge. It's a huge component of engaging the audience and accenting those wow factors that are in your piece. Because if you have um just this build up where the soloist, for example, is just it's about to go off. Like you might even have the bass dropping out entirely. There's a way that you can build up to that moment by increasing the dynamics in some of the other vocal parts. You can do the same thing. You can mirror that in ways with your rhythm by increasing the syncopation, leading up, like mirroring that anticipation. That's essentially what you have in order in your toolkit in order to provide a dynamic contrast in a piece. So making sure that you know how important that is and looking for ways that you can incorporate that, whether it be changing up sounds or a rhythm, is really really important. Namisha said, the bass line entirely can carry you in making decisions on what rhythm you're going to use for a section. Sometimes it's best to just go with them. Like it's not even a cop out. It is the right decision sometimes to just listen to that bass line and just groove with them. Just groove with them. Like I mean, there are so many songs where it's just like that bass line is so good. If I took that away, I would be doing it a disservice. Like when some people hear the song, you hear that bass line first. Like I'm trying to even think of a song where I can give an example. You guys think of anything?
We had two good. That's the first thing that comes to my mind.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. So another thing is phrasing. The way you can think of the piece, the music, like just a long paragraph, and there are going to be certain sections to it talking about different topics, right? But you're going to phrase things a specific way sometimes. Sometimes you're going to have like long pauses to accent the soloist, like I talked about before. So how are you going to make up for that space? Sometimes there's space for a reason. Sometimes there's space for silence because silence, the absence of something, can be more impactful than just trying to fill for no reason. So making sure that you're tactful about where you're putting those fills is actually a very difficult skill to develop, to be honest with you, because at first there's no indication of whether you're right or wrong when it comes to putting in a fill. You could just put it in and be like, yeah, I think that's right. But if you listen to it with and without, sometimes there's going to be a very clear option. You're going to be like, yeah, maybe I don't even really need that. It's just you get into the habit of, because we're essentially walking metronomes sometimes for the performance group. So because of that, when we're developing this rhythm and we're going and we're going and going for 2 minutes straight, sometimes we just want to keep going. Like we just get into this habit of it. So really taking the time to say, do I really need to fill here, or can I just do something simple, is really really important. Like those can be just as impactful. Giving the audience space to breathe, because they're going to notice the pauses. They'll notice the silence sometimes more than that little sound that you threw in because you thought it was cool. Like sometimes they're going to notice that more. So that's pretty much the gestalts of what you're looking for like making a piece like shine. You want to make the music shine, make the performers shine, and make the audience shine sometimes too. You want to make their experience like amazing, elevated. So in terms of who you're going to be talking to in your group, if your music director isn't the only guy that you refer to or person, then maybe the arranger is somebody different. You might ask them for some of these decisions that they might have made. Look at the bass section. Sometimes when we did breakout groups IRL, when we went to different music rooms to work with the bass section and the tenors and everything. I just sat in the bass section, was like, all right guys, let me hear what you got, and then we workshop some stuff. Listen to soloists too. Like sometimes when you audition a soloist, there's not even something written in the music for what they're going to do, and they have this unique vibrato, this unique thing, this timbre about them that they just do in their piece. And then when they have their wow moment, that's like what we're here to see. So like learn what your soloist is going to do, pay attention to it because it's not going to be the same depending on who does that part. That soloist is very, very unique, and you can actually bring a unique wow moment for them if you pay attention to that.
Speaking of bringing a unique wow moment for them, I remember when we were putting together a set back in 2019, I specifically asked our soloist Anthony, I was like, I don't know whether to do the crash in this measure or the measure right after, because he was holding out this ridiculously high belt for like two measures. He was like, let's hear it with both. We ran through both. He was like, I kind of like the second one. I was like, sick, you got it. We're gonna do this. Like, now this is our moment. Like, we've shared this performance, and now we know when that moment comes together, like, we're gonna be able to look at each other on stage. If he's not, eyes closed, belting, looking forward, but we're gonna be able to share something there as far as this energy goes. And so beyond just talking about the musical stuff, I would always make sure I understood what they were thinking about emotionally. Once we got to a point where they were comfortable singing it, knowing what they were singing about was really important for me to say, okay, they're feeling a little more misery in this section. How can I bring that out? They're feeling a little more joy here. How can I lighten this feeling? So all good questions to ask the different people. But transitions, going from one section to another, is a question that I feel like I get a decent amount because it's hard to make a good transition. Yeah, we can talk with your MD to see how they envision it. You can, Nimish, I'll pass it off to you because I feel like my transitions are literally are very methodical. Like I'd go through specific notes and how to do it.
No, yeah, I think we can, I'll probably have something to say here. I mean, there's a couple bullets here, but like what I'll basically say about transitions is like, it's really kind of just like, I'm like very big, and it sounds like I think CJ also, I'm getting the sense from you, but I'm very big on just kind of like the feel of the piece and like the musicality of it, right? Like if there are silences, do you fill them? Do you not fill them? That's like an artistic choice, and like he was saying, you can like pick what's appropriate. Um, there's sometimes tempo transitions where like you might want to speed up, slow down, and or there's like rhythmic transitions where you're switching from one like rhythm structure to another. For both of those speed changes and or rhythm changes, something that is really helpful is kind of like simplifying the beat. So if you have like a lot of like embellishments in it, just kind of like taking it out. I mean, I don't know, I could try to demonstrate something, but I don't have a particular like song in mind, but like if you have like right, so that's like a rhythm switch. There's more elegant ways to do it, but the point is you can kind of like take out like a lot of the like middle filler pieces and just kind of get to like the core rhythm, or like go to like the straight beat that Arun was showing earlier, and kind of like use that as a transition. Straight beats are also great for transitioning tempo. A lot of the times it's like very easy to like speed up your kicks. And that's actually also a great way to like build anticipation or like build energy, is like when the kicks just go like, right? So like you can kind of just like do things like that. So that kicks are like a really great way to transition. And then, the kind of whooshes that we were demonstrating earlier, he does this differently, but like, or, if you're a bass, I know basses like will always like throw in like the doo or whatever, and you can kind of like do that as like a VP too, because sometimes like the basses are catching their breath and they can't do that. So like you as the VP can kind of like fill that in as well. So I don't know if you guys have anything to add, but that's kind of generally, I think, like kind of like go-to tips for transitions.
I mean, speaking of the whooshes, like the way you just did it, there was one moment where I can remember I would go, or I was coming out from like, and just give 2 bars of this like whooshy crash cymbal, and then boom, new beat. When I said I do things methodically, it really was like, what rhythm do I have before? What do I have after? So if you're going from a syncopated, stylized rhythm, say, you want something in between that's going to allow you to shift it to that now straight rhythm, or vice versa. If you're starting from a straight rhythm and then going into 3-3-2, I would say my fills would hint at what's about to come. So I got a question last time after last week's workshop about how do I go from this really, really embellished rock beat to a more simple tropical style four on the floor. And I just said, you know what, your fill, keep your fill kind of syncopated, but then do more of the sounds that are going to be in the next section. So if they're going or for me, that I just keep a little bit more on the beat because I know in the next section it's going to be on the beat. So that's how I would approach my transitions. CJ, I don't know if you have anything to add.
I could go on about the transitions because we love a good transition. Back on our team, that was like our thing. The music director specifically, he was like, yo, for this transition, I need this energy and I need this energy. He was very big about the way the piece moved from one thing to the next because we were big on doing a continuous set, not taking breaks. And since that was the defining thing, with that in mind, okay, let's develop techniques that we can use so that way when we're looking to figure out what to do for a transition, it can be smooth and it can accent parts of the piece that we're trying to do. So even if we're not necessarily telling a story, which we rarely did, then we can capture the emotion coming from one song to the next and the change, the dynamic change from one thing to the next. But that's pretty much it. You guys said a lot of good stuff. In terms of stage presence, I got you guys. All right. So I love how applicable this is to every single person on the team. And just as a VP, it can be very difficult to do some of the things that you have to do and try to also be have a good presence on stage. Like that's a very strange balancing act to try and do. Especially because you don't have the luxury of showing all of your face most of the time. You have a mic in front of your face, right, for most of the time, and you have to learn how to emote with your body because as talented as a lot of the VPs may be, I've seen a lot of people just doing their job amazingly and then they're not emoting. They're not quite showcasing their showmanship on the stage. So some of the things that I do, and I had to effortfully practice once I've got my stuff on lockdown for what I'm gonna do VP wise, is I have to talk with my eyes to the audience. I have to show like this part of my face has to be able to tell a story. And so being more dramatic and like really accenting whatever emotion is that you're trying to capture and showing that passion and whatever it may be in a moment will mean will be you won't even look like you're a VP. You'll look just like every single other person on the stage who's like a character. So however you may do it, some of the things that the audience is going to be looking at and looking for, things that really draw the attention is going to be facial expressions, talking with your eyes, like I said, body expression. So moving with intention, it's really easy to get caught up in your own rhythm because like sometimes we use our bodies as a metronome. So making sure that that movement is still capturing for the audience and still can be like incorporated into the visual part of the performance is like the next level once you've gone past mastering your craft as a VP and just like doing your job in the moment. So making sure that you're moving with intention, you're not just aimlessly pacing back and forth because you're keeping a steady beat, is really important. And remembering to breathe because you may be like bowing over, you may be moving to the left and the right, and you're going to generate a lot of heat. You're going to be sweating, you're going to be working your butt off on stage. So making sure that you remember the mic techniques and the breath technique is really, really important. And that's why I like the systems, not necessarily when it comes to approaching the writing of the music, but the practicing of it. Like making sure that you have everything that you're supposed to do so that way when you add these other components in there, that is the performance, it's something that you can practice and because it's going to feel really different going straight. That's like the hardest thing to do is to go from standing in a circle singing and doing your VP stuff to then incorporate choreography. It's like, whoa, what am I doing? I gotta do this here while I'm also doing whooshes and all kinds of stuff. Like making sure that you incorporate those two so that when the memory is in your head, it's the muscle memory is I'm doing this beat line here while I'm bowing or while I'm passing a prop here, whatever it may be. Just making sure that you do those things. And so the way that I approach it is you can pick one, you can pick two, any combination of picking an emotion or a character. Just be somebody. Be somebody. When you walk onto the stage and you want to embody either an idea, an emotion, a character, it is so much easier to know where you need to be and what you need to do at a moment because you know what your job is. You know what your job is. If there's ever a moment in the set where it's not quite sure, like the feeling isn't resonating, if you can't just like point at an emotion and be like anger, sorrow, passion, if you can't just point at something or point at a character, uh, a devil. I used him a lot. I don't know why, guys. It's so easy to be demonic with your eyes and like try to be this crazy person, and that really helped me in some of the more intense things. Is just that this is the emotion that I'm trying to portray with my body, and so once I have that and I practice this, then all I need to do is use these references, whether it be an emotion tag or a character tag, and all I got to do is okay, I'm going back to the Joker. All right, cool. We got it. It's so that definitely helped increase the value of the performance that I was able to give, and I think a lot of people could benefit from understanding how important that is because to the average audience who there might be some VPs out there, but a lot of them aren't VPs, guys. Like they don't know what it is that we do and what we're trying to show. So like it's very impressive. It's a very impressive and awestruck thing to watch a performance and watch what we're able to do. So adding this little secret sauce that is like showmanship is going to be even more impactful to your performance. I credit a lot of our success to just the visual component of our performance as well, because I may not have had the coolest sounds or may not have been like a solo artist before I started, right? But when I'm on stage, I made sure I brought it every single day. You could see the passion, and I made sure that I showed that, so that when it came time for my solo, the technicalities wasn't what the audience was watching per se. They were watching for that showmanship. They're watching for the wow, the passion, show that emotion, bring them in and involve the audience. It's really important.
I can give you some specific things that I still remember about body language. I remember we had a whole discussion about palms and your hand, and what's the difference between an upturned palm versus a downturned palm versus a fist. One thing that I remember was if your palm is facing up, it's like you're asking for something, like you want something to come to you. If you're emotional about a lost love, then it's usually this palm up, trying to get that person back or get that moment back. If it was a palm down, then you're trying to exert some dominance over something. And you're trying to push it away from you, or you're trying to push down on it because you're stronger than it. If it's a fist, then you're probably angry, right? But there's also the idea of, is your fist constant? Is it turning? Is it opening up? Is it coming together to a fist? Like, how is that all working together? Along with that, picking an emotion and character. If I was doing a competition set, I always had a set of feelings that were changing and evolving and very dynamic throughout the set. But I also would have a very silly story just for me, just to have fun. Like when we did our ICCA set, I had a whole storyline where I pretended I was an Autobot and I was fighting the Decepticons, and like I was Optimus Prime when I walked on stage. And let me tell you, I had so much fun to be able to go from one song to the next and be like, oh no, Optimus just died. Like the Decepticons are winning. I'm sad. And like it just gives you another way to think about it and emote with a new feeling. So picking a character, picking an emotion can be as serious or as silly for yourself as you
That
want.
is awesome. I just got to say, that is actually awesome.
We had a whole discussion about that when we were talking pre-performances, and I was like, "Oh yeah, so you want to hear my Optimus Prime storyline?" Anyway, talk about mic technique.
Yeah, so we can jump in here. So, okay, there's like a bunch of different grips you can do. The point is, you need to like hold the mic in the way that's going to capture the sounds that you're doing. So, real quick, we'll just like run through like the four kind of like main ones. So, there's standard grip where you're just sort of like holding the mic, just kind of like playing. There's the one up grip, which is one that I do, where you can like bring it a little bit closer to your nose. And then if you flip to the next slide, there's like a two-hand cup where you can hold it like this and then another hand over here. So that's going to kind of like bring more of the sounds in, and it's going to capture a lot more, but it's going to be a lot more kind of like muddled because you're not really like giving it room to breathe. So it's going to kind of like sound very, like even if you just do it with your hands, right? Like that's kind of going to like feed into the mic. And then cupping grip, kind of similar, but like basically you like end up tilting the mic like a little bit further away from your lips. And so some like lighter sounds like hi-hats or like those might get lost because the mic's a little bit further away. So the point here really is that you can pick any of these grips depending on like what is best for you. If you flip to the previous slide, the standard grip is, kind of going to give you like the most space around a little bit if you like need to like move your lips a lot for sounds or things like that, or like need to like quickly move it around. Um, the one up grip, that's the one that I usually do, and I really like it because it can capture like nasal sounds better. So if you're doing any humming, or if you're doing like the tabla, like right, like that's gonna get cut better with like the one up. And then if you have like a lot of like really intricate sounds that you like want going in and you want to make sure none of them get lost and you want them to sound like really, really loud, then probably go with like two hands and like cup it, but the trade-off there is that it's not going to sound as clean. So it kind of just depends on like your style and the sounds that you really want to emphasize. But, as long as the sounds are getting picked up by the mic and they're sounding the way that you want them to sound, go with that.
Yeah, and to add, just I think mic technique is I mean is really really important, especially in actually in pretty much any setting when it comes to VP stuff. I mean you really can't understate the importance of it, but the buffet of selections isn't as complicated as you say. Just like Demetrius just trying to point out, basically if it's a lower frequency sound, you need to hold it closer up to your nose so that that resonance can be captured more. And if it's higher frequency sound, or it's like not quite as bassy, if it sounds like it's not quite a bass drum or a kick drum, it sounds like it's a higher sound, then you don't need that. You're probably going to muddle the sound by doing that. That's kind of the way that I thought about it, because that's how I learned as a bass. Like you need it here. Like you just do. You need to capture all that resonance. I recently started to learn how to do like a subharmonic pitches, and that is not going to be picked up in a live setting because it's such a low frequency. So the only way you can do it and have like the room hear it is with a mic, and I would obviously hold it very close to my nasal cavity so that I can capture those sounds.
Yeah, sometimes you're limited by the technology you have. So I know sometimes we'd end up at a gig and the SM58, the classic microphone we had, it would be an even older version of that, which didn't have a pop filter. And so that meant you'd have to hold it a little bit further away, or you might have to adjust where you're holding it. I know sometimes I would have to hold it to the side, not because that's how I beatbox, but because if I didn't, then I might blow out the mic.
Correct. And I
Yeah,
think
it
that's a big
is.
takeaway.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I think that's like a really important point, and I think it is one of those things where, for beatboxers especially, I think more so honestly than anybody else in an a cappella group, your performance is heavily, heavily affected by the mic because at the end of the day, if that mic doesn't pick up the sounds that you're doing in the way that you want, then like it's just not going to come out the right way. Like I had that happen to me honestly, like a fully fumbled sound check, like sophomore year of college. It like still haunts me a little bit because so many of my fills and sounds got lost, and like all you could hear was the kick drum, and I was like, "Ugh, never again." So
Oh
it
no.
is important, and it is one of those things. You can try to do your best to like learn it, but frankly, it is something that's just going to come with practice. So if you can get your hands on a mic more, if you can, like try setting up with speakers or any chance you get to like mess with sound equipment, it will pay off, especially if you're going to be doing competitions and stuff like that. Just try to get like your hands on a mic as much as possible.
Yeah, and live gigs, like you're just gonna have to learn to deal with the emotional sadness that is, oh, this mic is not great, and this is gonna be a little rough.
Sometimes the sound engineer just like has never dealt with a beatboxer before, and
Correct.
you just like have to do your best.
Just run it. Just
Yeah.
run it. Do boots and cats it, and it will be
Just
cool.
do your best.
The hardest ones were when we would just have stage mics and you didn't have individual mics. And so, regarding placement on stage, sometimes they would put the two stage mics in front and you would do an arc around. Usually, if that was the case, we didn't have choreo because that's stage mics and they're just standing on stage. So, we would have, if we were lucky, there would be a singular vocal percussion mic that we could use. If we were really lucky, then there's a vocal percussion mic and a soloist mic. But in the case where we didn't have that, the placement of your beatboxer needs to be in front of the diaphragm of the mic. So you had to know your microphone layout. Go up to the stage microphone, take a look, try to peek in the inside, shine your phone camera light, like see where the inside of it is facing, and you want to be in front of that, not over to the side, not over at like an angle. If that means you are now not the edge of the arc, but you're a little bit further in, you might be heard better. But sometimes that was a sacrifice I have to make. Um, we have a pretty small crew, so I don't know if we need to do breakout rooms specifically.
We could
So
probably just do the Q&A
An
here.
open Q&A is probably
yeah.
be good.
Yeah.
Um, we can take questions in the chat out loud. If something else we were considering is if you have songs you're working on and you want us to listen to it, we would love to just play the original, or if you have the audio of your arrangement, we'll listen to that and we can help you through whatever you want to work on. But we'll
Yeah.
give you a
Kind of
couple of
any
minutes.
questions you have related to any arrangements or anything beatboxing related or what have you.
Problems or thoughts, even if it's just like thoughts related to beatboxing. Like,
This is where I cue the Jeopardy music, and
yeah.
this is what they say in teacher terms is your think time, and I have to write this into my lesson plan. Think time, wait time, and then you got to ask, all right, who's gonna raise their hand?
Yeah.
Let me start. Well, let's think of like what would we want to know?
Yeah, what would I want to know?
What would we want to
Do
know?
we are there any female beatboxers here?
Going, yeah.
Yay, need to represent. One thing I will say is, I don't know if you feel like this, hopefully not, but like, obviously it is like super, there's like a lot more guy beatboxers than girls, but I was usually pretty nervous about that when I had started out freshman year, and then quickly won my first award. So all I want to say is that like, it really doesn't matter if you're a guy or a girl. Like, if you like know how to beatbox, you know how to beatbox, and like,
Yeah,
it like you'll be fun.
yeah. Nimisha is like one of the sickest beatboxers I know of all time, just hands down. It's like I can
Period.
name a few beatboxers, and I'm like, there's no qualification to it. It's just like
Nah.
that's fucking sick.
Sweet of you to say.
Hmm. I think about what I would want to know.
It's like it's weird trying to go back. Like, what would I
Yeah.
want to? Just I'm trying to think of times where just like the average struggle, like the daily day struggle, and how we tackled it. Maybe might be a
Yeah, or
more
like anything
relatable
that like
thing.
made you like nervous
Oh
or
my
Yeah.
like
god, eye
was hard.
contact. Eye
Eye
contact was
contact?
so
Mm.
scary for me, and I would only practice by watching myself in the mirror. Like I would make eye contact with myself because I was my biggest judge, and I would just stare at myself until I felt like I was actually authentically emoting, and then I would feel comfortable like actually being good with the song. But
Mm.
I would run a whole set with choreo with like all the motion and everything the entire time facing a mirror. And if the choreo required me to turn, I would do that section where I turned and then I would go back a bar and realign myself. So when I turned, I was then again facing the mirror. So mirror work was huge. I think another thing that I specifically remember was one master class where the guy made us literally stare at an audience member for the entire 10-minute set. And we had to choose one or two people to just lock eyes with and do the set towards. And yeah, at that point, when you're comfortable enough to emote and you feel those emotions, then there's like this feedback loop between you and the audience member, and you just start to get emotional. And so yeah, there was some stained makeup afterwards on some people, but yeah, I think just the eye contact was so hard for me, and it just took practice, it just took time. Stage presence in general was really hard.
It's a whole thing. It's actually there should be a master class on stage presence. I just I could talk about it forever. I'm so
Our
serious.
thing, the thing that we always emphasized was like, if nothing else, like if you're doing nothing else for emoting stage presence or anything, just eyebrows up.
Raise your
Like
eyebrows.
raise your
Yes.
eyebrows. That's
Yes.
it. That's the only thing. And
Period.
even as a VP, right? Like you can do that. Like you can raise your
Yes.
eyebrows. I actually am getting okay. Like I'm like I guess I'm like older than some of you, but like I'm getting wrinkles on my forehead, and it might be from acapella because I was always like this,
Just
always, and I can like see the lines now, and I'm like, oh, this might be an after effect of that.
yeah, yeah.
But yeah, that's how
Acapella.
much you have to raise your eyebrows.
Yeah, acapella like showed me how big my eyes could go. Like that was how I knew because I was just this all day, like anytime. It was actually hard to distinguish between when I was trying to be crazy and when I was trying to just be happy because my eyes were just so wide.
Yeah. Does anybody have any questions? Like, you don't have to be shy. You can put it in the chat. I mean, if you don't have questions, that's fine too, but just kind of like opening the floor one more time in case anybody has something they want to ask.
I mean, I guess if there's like one thing you do differently starting out, because I'm definitely like still in the starting out phase of things. I'm a sophomore and our old beatboxer graduated. It was pretty much who wants to do this now. So that's where I'm at. So anything you would have done differently, I guess, because you've all
More breath
shown
support.
what you
Well,
actually did.
first of all, props to you taking on the mantle. That is such a big deal. Just like It's rising to the occasion and taking on that responsibility. Very, very big props. Much respect.
Yeah. I think two things come to mind. One that I do differently, and one kind of just tip for starting out. So differently, I think I would have I didn't really do this, but I wish I would have done more breath exercises. I think like my stamina got built up over time just because I was beatboxing so much and performing so much that it like got better. But like my God, when it got better, like a year or two after I'd like been doing it, it made like a world of a difference. So I think if you can do those breath exercises earlier, I think that would have like helped me a lot. And then two, I just kind of want to reemphasize something CJ had said earlier, which is if you're just starting out, right? Like, focus on the rhythm and like don't worry about any of the other fancy stuff unless you like until you just get like the BTK down. Like, really just like focus on that because you can incorporate all this other fancy stuff we've been talking about and it will make it better. But like at the end of the day, like if you've heard of like the 80-20 rule, right? Like 80% of like what the payoff is going to be is from like the basics. So like it's fine if you don't want to like do all the other fancy stuff. You're just starting out, just focus on the core and like you'll be fine.
Period. I would say that too. I have such a different perspective now from when I first started out. It's so hard to convince yourself that it's true because you haven't seen the result yet. But I'm telling you, like there was so much unconfidence in like how I was coming in completely unknowingly and basically out of necessity becoming a beatboxer, not something out of my own fruition. So I didn't have like all this experience looking things up and like practicing for years and years. So I was just like I need to get my kit down and but I felt so intimidated because it just seemed like everybody at a performance, like when it came time for the beatbox solo or anything, like they'd been doing this. Like they have the ability to make all these cool sounds and everything, and it was really intimidating. But that just what Namisha said, like just like I attribute all of any success that I had to just like having the fundamentals down pat. Like my BTK, awesome. I love that thing, and I will whip that out and just to the day I die. Like that is it. It's not about the fancy sound that you can make. As much fun as that is, and it is just focus on your fundamentals and don't be afraid to like ask people questions, like ask other beatboxers and ask them how they make some sounds or what they do. Like because like I said, this is an oral process, and I think if anything that I regret, which I don't really, but like so what I want to do more of is talk to other people and just ask them like their process or what they do, because I learned a lot from just doing this a lot last year for the first time when when Arun, myself, and Ishan we all like put this on and we talked about all the things that we used to do in our stories and we got our stories after the fact but we didn't get it during, right? If I talked to Ishan and Arun and all these other people while we were figuring it out, I probably could have learned so many more things to add to my toolkit while I was growing and maturing as a beatboxer. So I definitely would advise just talking to people. Don't be down on yourself. Like be confident in your fundamentals, work on that, and then once you have that, be a boss. Just be a boss.
Yeah, there's no one moment where you're like, I'm a vocal percussionist now. It's like you're one
Period.
now. It's like that's it. So for me, I'm like, I wish I focused more on my breathing in tempo and how I controlled my breath in the tempo because I I feel like the point that I got to by the end was I was always more impressed with myself when I could make a simple line or like a simpler line than what I used to write in my early stages because I wanted so much embellishment and everything. I was kind of selfish in how much I wanted to do. I think I was more impressed by myself when I could go through a song, but then have the volume completely overshadow the rest of the group. And it was so cool to be like, all right, my crash cymbal and that snare were louder than the other 16 people. And when that's going to go through a mic, the audience is going to be blown away. Now, I'm not going to do that for the entire song, but just knowing that I have such breath control, or I could get there. I don't have that anymore, but I could get there at that point and like have some variation in the levels. I think I found more satisfaction from that later on than I did from just the rhythms because I would end up learning the rhythm and then I would get to being on stage and get nervous and rush it. I was like, oh, well, that takes away the point of doing a cool rhythm. Like I could have done a simpler thing and just made it a little bit more punchy and that would have been more impressive. because I would have stayed in tempo. So I think my breathing in tempo, my sounds in tempo, I would have done more with that my first couple of years.
Thanks.
It was a great question.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Okay, well, if nobody else has questions, maybe do you want to flip to the slide with our like contact info in case, if
Yeah.
anybody
Mm,
is interested
true.
to look us up.
CJ's too cool for Instagram, but you can catch
Ah,
him.
okay.
Yeah,
well,
so I don't do Instagram.
I'm gonna get an Instagram, guys. Don't worry. They were roasting me in our prep session, guys. Like she's like, why is your contact like that?
Well, yeah, because I was like, well, I would have followed him on Instagram, but I can't.
No.
So
Well, my bad, y'all.
One day.
One day.
yeah, feel free to follow,
Mm.
reach out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That part.
And all the ASA stuff. So
Cool.
fun.